He didn't look like the heir to a fortune. He looked like a nuisance. In the high-stakes world of elite aviation, flight attendant Stella Caroline thought she knew exactly who belonged in first class and who didn't. When a sickly, disheveled boy stumbled into seat 1A, she didn't see a human being. She saw a stain on her perfect cabin. She dragged him. She screamed at him. And in a moment of pure cruelty, she kicked the only thing keeping him alive. She thought she was taking out the trash. She had no idea she was waking up a dragon, because the man walking down the jet bridge wasn't just a father. He was the man who signed her paychecks. This is the story of Flight 902, the mistake that cost a career, and the billionaire who burned it all down. The air inside the cabin of Oceanic Airlines. Flight 902 smelled of expensive leather, conditioned ozone, and the faint, crisp scent of champagne. It was the smell of exclusivity. Stella Caroline adjusted her silk scarf in the reflection of the galley oven. Perfection. That was the only standard acceptable in the first-class cabin of the Boeing 747, bound for London Heathrow. At 32, Stella was the senior purser, a position she defended with the ferocity of a guard dog. She wasn't just a flight attendant. She was the gatekeeper of luxury. To Stella, the curtain separating first class from economy wasn't just fabric. It was a border wall. "We have a full house today, Stella," her junior colleague Jessica whispered, glancing at the manifest. "Some VIPs, a senator, 2 tech moguls, and a Vance in 1A. Stella raised an perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Vance? As in the Vance family? I didn't see that on the briefing." "Last-minute addition. Ticket bought at the counter. Full fare. Cash." Stella smoothed her skirt. This was her moment. Rumor had it that Oceanic was looking for a new head of in-flight services, a corporate role that came with a 6-figure salary and no more jet lag. Serving a Vance, likely a relative of the reclusive industrialist Damien Vance, could be her golden ticket. She imagined a handsome, middle-aged man in a bespoke Tom Ford suit, perhaps needing a specific scotch she could expertly provide. "Prepare the pre-flight sparkling wine," Stella commanded, her voice tight. "And make sure the hot towels are actually hot this time, Jessica. I won't have a repeat of the Denver incident." The boarding process began. The wealthy drifted in like royalty. There was Mr. Sterling, the investment banker who always complained about the ice cube shape. Mrs. Galloway, the socialite with the terrifying poodle in a handbag, and a stream of businessmen glued to their phones. Stella greeted them all with her practiced, dazzling smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Sterling. Lovely to see you again, Mrs. Galloway." The cabin filled up. Seat 1A, the prime spot, remained empty. "Maybe he's a no-show," Jessica whispered. "Vances don't no-show," Stella hissed. "They arrive precisely when they mean to." The final boarding call for the main cabin echoed through the jet bridge. The chaotic rush of economy passengers began to filter through the second door, but the first-class door remained open for that one last passenger. Then he appeared. He was not wearing a Tom Ford suit. He was not middle-aged. He was not handsome. A boy, no older than 12, shuffled onto the plane. He looked like a stiff wind could knock him over. He wore an oversized grey hoodie that had seen better days, the cuffs frayed and stained with what looked like grease. His jeans were baggy, bunching over worn-out sneakers that were untied. His skin was ashen, a sickly contrast to his deep, dark complexion, and beads of sweat stood out on his forehead, despite the cool cabin air. He was clutching a battered backpack to his chest like a lifeline. He wheezed as he walked, a wet, rattling sound that made Mrs. Galloway recoil into her seat. Stella froze. Her smile didn't just drop, it evaporated. The boy stopped in the aisle looking confused. He blinked, his eyes glassy and unfocused. He looked at the ticket in his trembling hand, then at the placard for 1A. He slumped into the wide leather seat. Stella was moving before she even registered the decision. She crossed the cabin in 3 long strides, her heels silent on the plush carpet. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was loud. Too loud for first class. It was the voice she used for drunks in economy. "You are in the wrong seat." The boy looked up. His eyes were wide, rimmed with red. He tried to speak, but a cough racked his small body. He pointed a shaking finger at the seat number. I sit here," he rasped. "Let me see your boarding pass," Stella demanded, snatching the paper from his hand before he could offer it. She scanned it. Leo Vance. Seat 1A, first class. Her brain refused to process it. It was a mistake. It had to be. This boy looked like he had just crawled out of a homeless shelter. He smelled faintly of rain and something metallic. He was disturbing the aesthetic. He was ruining her cabin. "Where are your parents?" she snapped, looking past him. "Parking," the boy managed to wheeze. "Dad, coming." "This is a first-class ticket," Stella said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Did you find this? Did someone give this to you?" Mr. Sterling, in seat 2A, sighed loudly. "Stella, is there a problem? I'd rather not catch whatever plague that child is carrying before we even take off." "I'm handling it, Mr. Sterling," Stella assured him, beaming a quick apology before turning her glare back to the boy. "Listen to me. You cannot sit here. This cabin is for paying customers. I don't know how you got this pass, but I'm going to need you to move to the back until we sort this out." "No," Leo whispered. He clutched the armrests. "Dad said, sit here. Wait for him." "I don't care what your dad said," Stella said, using air quotes that felt like slaps. "You are distressing the other passengers. Up, now." This was the beginning of the end for Stella Caroline, though she didn't know it yet. She was looking at a boy, but she was fighting a war against her own prejudices, and she was about to lose spectacularly. The tension in the cabin was palpable. It wasn't just awkward, it was hostile. The wealthy passengers of first class were not used to disruptions, and they certainly weren't used to seeing poverty, or what looked like it, invading their sanctuary. I can't breathe good," Leo stammered, his chest heaving. The stress of the confrontation was triggering something. His breathing grew faster, shallower. "Need water." "You can get water in economy," Stella said, crossing her arms. "I'm not going to ask you again. Get up." "Stella," Jessica, the junior flight attendant, stepped forward tentatively. She looked worried. He looks really sick. Maybe we should check his vitals. And the ticket is valid in the system. I checked." "Don't be naive, Jessica," Stella snapped, not breaking eye contact with the boy. "Systems glitch, or people steal. Look at him. Does he look like he can afford a $12,000 seat? He's probably the son of one of the janitors who snagged a dropped pass. If I let him stay, I get written up for compromising cabin security." Leo fumbled with his backpack. His hands were shaking so violently he couldn't get the zipper open. "Medicine," he gasped. "In. Bag." "Stop rummaging," Stella shouted, causing several passengers to jump. "I don't know what you have in there." "He's got a weapon!" Mr. Sterling yelled, unbuckling his seatbelt. "He's reaching for something." Panic is a contagious disease, and in the enclosed tube of an airplane, it spreads faster than a virus. Stella's training should have kicked in. De-escalate, assess, calm. But her bias had already painted a picture. Dangerous intruder. She lunged forward and grabbed the backpack from the boy's hands. "No!" Leo screamed, a ragged, broken sound. "Give it! Back!" "I am confiscating this for safety," Stella declared, holding the bag out of his reach. Please." Tears streamed down Leo's face, mixing with the sweat. "Inhaler. Please." His face was turning a terrifying shade of grey. His lips were tinged with blue. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was reaching for air. Jessica saw it. "Stella, he's having an asthma attack, or something worse. Give him the bag." "He is faking it," Stella yelled, the adrenaline of the power trip blinding her. "It's a sympathy ploy. I've seen it 1,000 times." "I'm calling the captain," Jessica said, turning toward the cockpit. "You will stay right there," Stella ordered. "I am the senior purser. I run this cabin. I am removing this passenger." She turned back to Leo. He was no longer arguing. He was slumped sideways in the seat, clutching his throat, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. The wheezing had stopped, replaced by a terrifying silence, the silence of no air moving at all. "Get up!" Stella grabbed his arm. It was frail, shockingly thin. She yanked him. Leo was dead weight. He tumbled out of the wide leather seat and hit the floor of the aisle with a dull thud. "Oh my God," Mrs. Galloway gasped, putting a hand to her mouth. "Is he dead?" "He's just refusing to walk," Stella announced, though a flicker of doubt began to prickle at the back of her neck. She looked down at the boy. He was curling into a fetal position at her feet, right in the middle of the pristine aisle. "Get up," she hissed through gritted teeth. She bent down, grabbing his hoodie. "You are delaying this flight. You are embarrassing yourself." Leo's eyes rolled back slightly. His hand swatted weakly at her ankle, trying to push himself up, or perhaps begging for help. To Stella, it felt like an attack. "Don't you touch me!" she shrieked. And then she did the unthinkable. The cabin went silent. Even the ambient hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to fade away. Stella Caroline, senior purser, aspiring corporate executive, looked down at the sick, gasping child at her feet. His hand was clutching the hem of her uniform skirt, a desperate anchor in his drowning world. She didn't help him up. She didn't call for a medic. She pulled her leg back and kicked his hand away. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a sharp, vicious kick with the pointed toe of her regulation heel. The heel connected with the boy's wrist and the side of his ribs. Crack. The sound was small, but in the silence of first class, it sounded like a gunshot. Leo let out a high-pitched whimper and curled tighter into a ball, clutching his wrist. The inhaler, which had fallen out of his pocket during the fall, skittered across the floor. Stella saw the plastic device. She saw the boy reaching for it with his uninjured hand. With a sneer of pure contempt, she kicked the inhaler. It slid under seat 4B, far out of the boy's reach. "Get off my plane," she seethed, looming over him. "Now." "That is enough!" The voice didn't come from the cockpit. It didn't come from the passengers. It came from the boarding door. The voice was low, baritone, and vibrated with a frequency that commanded instant submission. It wasn't a shout. It was a rumble of thunder before a tornado. Stella spun around. Standing in the entryway of the aircraft was a man. He was tall, standing well over 6'2". He wore a black trench coat over a charcoal suit that cost more than Stella's car. He didn't have luggage. He didn't have a carry-on. He had a phone in one hand and a look on his face that could freeze boiling water. This was Damien Vance, but Stella didn't know his face. She only saw another black man interrupting her authority. "Sir, you cannot be on this plane," she shouted, pivoting her aggression toward the new target. "Boarding is closed. You need to leave immediately." Damien didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on the floor, on the crumpled heap of grey hoodie and denim. "Leo," Damien said. His voice broke. The titan of industry dropped to his knees, ignoring the dirt on the floor, ignoring the expensive fabric of his trousers. He crawled to the boy. "Dad." Leo wheezed, his eyes fluttering. "Can't breathe." Damien's hands, usually steady enough to sign billion-dollar mergers, were trembling as he touched his son's face. He looked at the wrist, swollen and bruising rapidly. He looked at the panic in his son's eyes. "Where is it?" Damien barked, his head snapping up. "Where is his inhaler? He has severe asthma. Where is it?" Stella stood frozen. The realization was hitting her like a slow-motion car crash. Dad. This was the father. This was the Vance from the manifest. But her pride was a heavy anchor. She couldn't let go. He was causing a disturbance," Stella stammered, her voice losing its edge. "He attacked me. I was following protocol." "Protocol?" Damien stood up. He didn't just stand, he unfolded. He seemed to grow larger, filling the space with a terrifying dark energy. He looked at Stella. Then he looked at Mr. Sterling, who was now shrinking into his seat. He looked at the inhaler under seat 4B. He walked over, retrieved the inhaler, and returned to his son. He administered the puff. Once. Twice. They waited. 5 agonizing seconds. 10. Leo took a breath. A real one. The color began to seep back into his face. He gripped his father's hand. She kicked me, Dad." The air left the room. Damien Vance slowly turned his head toward Stella. His eyes were no longer human. They were the eyes of a predator, staring at prey that had already been killed, but didn't know it yet. "You kicked him?" Damien asked. The volume was barely a whisper. "He refused to move," Stella defended herself, though her hands were shaking uncontrollably now. "He didn't look like... He didn't belong." "He didn't belong," Damien repeated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black titanium card. But it wasn't a credit card. It was an ID badge. It had the Oceanic Airlines logo on it. But underneath, in gold letters, it didn't say pilot or crew. It read, "Damien Vance, Chairman of the Board, Vanguard Holdings," and below that, "Majority Shareholder, Oceanic Airlines." Stella's knees gave way. She had to grab the galley counter to stop from collapsing. "You didn't just kick a passenger," Damien said, stepping into her personal space. "You kicked my son, and you are standing on my plane." He pulled out his phone. He didn't dial security. He didn't dial the police. "Get the CEO of Oceanic on the line," he said into the phone, his voice echoing through the silent cabin. "Wake him up. Tell him Damien Vance is at JFK. Tell him I'm about to fire the entire flight crew of Flight 902, and tell him to bring the police. I have an assault charge to file." The silence in the first-class cabin of Flight 902 was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a physical weight. It pressed against the eardrums, heavy and suffocating, thicker than the pressurized air pumped through the vents. Stella Caroline stood rooted to the spot near the galley. Her feet, usually so comfortable in her regulation heels, felt like they were encased in concrete blocks. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, bird-like rhythm that echoed in her ears. Thump, 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 thump. Across from her, the dynamic of the universe had shifted. Damien Vance was no longer kneeling. He had risen to his full height, a towering monolith of suppressed rage in a charcoal suit. But he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at his phone, waiting for the connection to complete. On the floor, Leo was sitting up, leaning against the bulkhead. The color was slowly returning to his cheeks, though his breathing was still ragged, a wet, raspy sound that cut through the luxury of the cabin. Jessica, the junior attendant, had defied Stella's earlier orders. She was kneeling beside the boy, holding a bottle of water to his lips with trembling hands. "Just small sips, sweetie," Jessica whispered, her voice shaking. She kept glancing up at Damien, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. She knew, even if Stella was still in denial, She knew they were in the presence of something far more dangerous than turbulence. "Richard," Damien said into the phone. The single word was spoken with a terrifying calmness. It wasn't a shout. It was the tone of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard across continents. Stella watched Damien's jaw muscle twitch. She saw the way his hand gripped the phone, white-knuckled, the veins prominent against his dark skin. "I am at JFK," Damien continued, his eyes scanning the cabin, lingering on the terrified faces of the other passengers before settling back on Stella. "Gate 42, flight 902. Yes, your flagship route." A pause. The person on the other end, presumably Richard Sterling, the actual CEO of Oceanic Airlines, was speaking. "No, Richard, we are not taking off," Damien interrupted, cutting off whatever apology or explanation was being offered. "The aircraft is grounded, effective immediately." Stella felt a cold drop of sweat slide down her spine. Grounded? A single passenger couldn't ground a Boeing 777. It cost the airline thousands of dollars a minute. It disrupted the global network. It was impossible. "Because," Damien said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "Your senior purser just assaulted my son." The word hung in the air. Assault. Stella flinched as if she'd been slapped. "I didn't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was just—" Damien held up a hand, silencing her without looking at her. He listened to the phone again. "I don't care about the union, Richard. I don't care about the PR spin. I want the Port Authority here in 5 minutes. And I want you to look up the registry of this specific aircraft. Tell me who paid for it." He hung up. He didn't put the phone in his pocket. He held it like a weapon. The captain of the flight, a seasoned pilot named Captain Reynolds, finally emerged from the cockpit. He had been alerted by the commotion and the delay. He was a man used to being the ultimate authority in the sky, wearing 4 gold stripes on his shoulder epaulets. "What is going on here?" Reynolds demanded, putting on his command voice. He looked at Stella, who was pale and shaking, and then at the tall man in the aisle. "Sir, you need to take a seat, or leave the aircraft. You are violating federal aviation regulations by standing in the aisle during—" "Captain Reynolds," Damien said. He knew the pilot's name. He hadn't looked at a badge. He just knew. Reynolds paused, thrown off balance. "How do you—" "This aircraft," Damien said, gesturing around the cabin. "Tail number N902OA, delivered 4 years ago. It features the new Rolls-Royce Trent 8000 engines. The interior was refitted last month by a firm in Milan." Reynolds blinked. "That's correct. Are you with corporate?" Damien stepped forward. The space between the two men vanished. "I am the reason you have a job, Captain. And right now, I am the only reason you still have a plane to fly." Damien turned slightly, pointing a long finger down at Leo. "Look at his wrist." Captain Reynolds looked down. Leo was holding his arm against his chest. Even from a distance, the swelling was visible. A dark, angry, purple bruise was blossoming across the boy's slender wrist, right where the bone met the hand. "Stella?" The captain turned to his purser, his voice losing its authority, replaced by confusion. "What happened?" "He wouldn't move, Captain," Stella blurted out, the dam breaking. He was faking an attack. He didn't have a ticket. I mean, he had a ticket, but look at him. I thought he stole it. I was protecting the cabin." "You kicked him," a voice from seat 2A said. It was Mr. Sterling, no relation to the CEO, the investment banker who had earlier complained about the boy. But self-preservation is a powerful instinct among the wealthy. He had done the math. He saw the badge Damien had flashed earlier. He saw the suit. He realized that Stella Caroline was a sinking ship, and he wasn't going to drown with her. "I saw it," Mr. Sterling said, unbuckling his seatbelt and standing up to distance himself from the incident. The boy was on the floor, gasping for air. She kicked the inhaler away. Then she kicked the boy. I didn't mean to," Stella stammered, looking around for an ally. She looked at Mrs. Galloway. Mrs. Galloway clutched her poodle tighter and looked out the window, refusing to make eye contact. "You kicked a child?" Captain Reynolds looked at Stella with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Stella, tell me that isn't true." "He didn't belong here," Stella shrieked, her composure shattering completely. "Look at this filth! He's ruining the first-class experience." "This filth," Damien's voice sliced through her hysteria, "is named Leo, and he wasn't flying to London for a vacation." Damien walked over to his son. He knelt again, his movements slow and deliberate. He brushed a piece of lint off the boy's grey hoodie. "He was flying to London," Damien said softly, addressing the silent cabin, "to undergo a specialized gene therapy treatment at the Royal London Hospital, a treatment that is only available there, a treatment for the rare autoimmune disorder that makes him look, as you put it, like a junkie." He stood up, turning to face Stella. The sadness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard granite. He was wearing that hoodie because his skin is so sensitive that regular fabrics feel like sandpaper. He was alone because I was in a board meeting in Manhattan that ran late, closing the acquisition of the fuel supplier that keeps this airline running. I told him to go ahead. I told him he would be safe. Damien took a step toward Stella. She backed up until her back hit the galley wall. "I told him," Damien whispered, "that the staff would take care of him." Sirens began to wail outside. Blue and red lights flashed against the cabin windows, illuminating the interior in a chaotic strobe. The authorities had arrived, but before the police could board, a man in a high-visibility vest ran down the jet bridge. He was panting, clutching a radio. It was the station manager for JFK. "Mr. Vance!" the station manager yelled, bursting into the cabin. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. We got the call from HQ. The CEO is on the line again. He wants to speak to you immediately." Damien ignored the station manager. He looked at the door. 2 officers from the Port Authority Police Department stepped onto the plane. They were big men, dressed in dark blue uniforms, hands resting on their utility belts. They scanned the scene, the crying flight attendant, the kneeling billionaire, the injured boy. "What's the problem here?" the older officer asked. Stella saw her chance. This was the law. The law respected uniforms. The law respected protocol. "Officer," she cried out, pushing past the captain. "Thank God, this man forced his way onto the plane. He is threatening the crew, and that boy is a vagrant who refused to leave the aircraft." She pointed a trembling finger at Damien. "Arrest him. He's disrupting a federal flight." The officer looked at Stella. Then he looked at Damien. Damien didn't say a word. He simply reached into his inner pocket. "He has a gun!" Stella screamed, ducking behind the beverage cart. Damien pulled out the black titanium ID badge again. He flipped it open. The officer stepped forward and squinted at the badge. He read the text. He saw the gold embossing. He looked at Damien's face, and then he seemed to recognize him from the news, or perhaps just from the sheer aura of power the man projected. The officer's posture changed instantly. He relaxed his stance. He took off his hat. "Mr. Vance," the officer said, nodding respectfully. "My apologies. We received a call from the commissioner. He said you requested immediate assistance regarding a felony assault on a minor." Stella, peeking out from behind the cart, felt the blood drain from her face. "The commissioner?" "Yes," Damien said. "Officer, I would like to file charges against this woman." He pointed at Stella. "Aggravated assault, child endangerment, and Damien paused. He looked at the cabin wall, right next to the entrance door. There was a small brass plaque screwed into the paneling, something most passengers walked past without noticing. "And I want you to read that plaque," Damien said to Stella. "What?" Stella breathed, confused. "Read it," Damien commanded. Stella looked at the plaque. She had walked past it 1,000 times. She had polished it, but she had never actually read it. She squinted through her tears. "This Boeing 747 is dedicated to the memory of Eleanor Vance, 1985-2018, beloved wife and mother. May she fly with the angels." The realization hit Stella like a physical blow to the stomach. She doubled over, gasping. Eleanor Vance, Damien's late wife, Leo's mother. "You kicked my son," Damien said, his voice breaking with the weight of the memory, "on the plane that I bought and named after his dead mother. You desecrated her memorial with your prejudice." The silence that followed was absolute. "Officer," Damien said, turning his back on Stella, "get her off my plane." The handcuffs were not comfortable. That was the first distinct thought that pierced the fog of shock in Stella Caroline's mind. They were cold, heavy, stainless steel, and they bit into the delicate skin of her wrists, pinching the nerves. They were tight, tighter than they needed to be, she thought. "You're making a mistake," Stella whispered. Her voice was no longer the projecting, authoritative boom of a senior purser. It was a dry rattle, barely audible over the hum of the aircraft systems. I can fix this. Let me talk to him. Please." Officer Caroline, no relation, a cruel irony of the name tag she stared at, didn't answer. He simply spun her around. The motion was rough, professional, and devoid of sympathy. "Stella Caroline," the officer recited, the words sounding like a funeral dirge. "You are under arrest for assault in the 2nd degree, child endangerment, and interference with a flight crew member's duties. Ironic, considering that's you. You have the right to remain silent." "I am the crew!" Stella shrieked, a sudden burst of hysteria breaking through. She twisted her neck to look back at the first-class cabin. "Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Galloway, tell them! He was threatening the flight!" She looked for allies. She found only an audience. Mr. Sterling, the investment banker who had complained about the boy's smell earlier, was now holding his iPhone 14 Pro up. The red recording dot was visible on the screen. He wasn't filming the boy anymore. He was filming her. Mrs. Galloway had pulled her poodle into her lap and was deliberately looking out the window, shielding her eyes, as if Stella were a bright, blinding light she couldn't bear to see. "Let's go," the second officer said, gripping Stella's upper arm. His fingers dug into the crisp, navy blue fabric of her blazer, the uniform she had worn like armor for 10 years. Now, it was just clothes. They began to walk. The aisle of a Boeing 777 first-class cabin is wide, designed for luxury and ease of movement. But to Stella, it felt like a tunnel closing in. Every step was a mile. As they passed seat 1A, the procession stopped. Damien Vance was standing there. He had not sat down. He was holding Leo, who was now sitting in the leather chair, clutching an ice pack that Jessica, the junior attendant, had brought from the galley. Stella looked at Damien. She wanted to scream, to beg, to explain that she was just tired, that she was stressed about the promotion, that she didn't mean to be cruel. She wanted to say that the boy looked like a threat. But when she met Damien's eyes, the words died in her throat. Damien didn't look angry anymore. Rage is hot, it burns and flickers. Damien looked hollow. He looked at her with the detached curiosity of a scientist, observing a particularly nasty virus under a microscope. "My wife died 4 years ago," Damien said softly. The silence in the cabin was so deep that even the passengers in row 4 leaned in to hear. "She died of the same autoimmune condition Leo has," We spent her last months in hospitals, fighting for air, fighting for dignity. He leaned in closer, his expensive cologne mixing with the scent of Stella's fear. She designed this cabin interior, Damien whispered. She picked this shade of blue. She wanted it to feel like the sky. And you turned it into a gutter. I didn't know, Stella sobbed. Tears were finally streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup, streaking black mascara down her cheeks like war paint. Ignorance, Damien said, straightening his coat, is not a defense for cruelty. Get her out of my sight. The officers shoved her forward. The walk through the jet bridge was a nightmare. The transition from the warm, carpeted cabin to the cold, industrial metal of the bridge felt like crossing into the underworld. The air smelled of jet fuel and damp concrete. But the real horror waited inside the terminal. Word travels fast in an airport. The rumor mill of the ground crew, the gate agents, and the baggage handlers moves at the speed of light. By the time Stella was led out of the jet bridge and into the bright, sterile lights of Terminal 4, a crowd had gathered. It wasn't just passengers waiting to board. It was the other Oceanic Airlines staff. Gate agents she had snapped at for printing the wrong manifest. Junior flight attendants she had disciplined for wearing the wrong shade of lipstick. Baggage handlers she had ignored for a decade. They were all there, standing in a semicircle, watching. Stella lowered her head. She tried to hide her face with her shoulder, but her hands were cuffed behind her back. There was nowhere to hide. Someone in the crowd, a young gate agent named Marcus, whom Stella had written up last week for chewing gum, lifted his phone. Flash. Then another. Flash. Then a sea of screens. Stella Caroline, the queen of the cabin, was being paraded through her own kingdom in chains. The click-clack of her heels, usually a sound of authority, now sounded pathetic and uneven as she stumbled, trying to keep up with the officer's long strides. "Is that the purser?" someone whispered loudly. "I heard she kicked a kid. A sick kid. I heard it was Damien Vance's son. She is so done." The whispers swirled around her like hornets. Stella closed her eyes, wishing she could wake up, wishing she could go back to 3 hours ago, to the moment the boy walked on the plane. She would seat him. She would give him water. She would be kind. But time, unlike a flight, has no return trip. It took exactly 42 minutes for the video to go viral. While Stella was being processed in a holding cell at the Port Authority police station, at JFK, a small, windowless room that smelled of bleach and despair, the world outside was judging her. Mr. Sterling, the investment banker in seat 2A, had a modest Twitter following of about 2,000 people, mostly other finance types. But he knew how to write a headline. He uploaded the video of Damien Vance confronting Stella. The angle was perfect. You couldn't see the kick, but you could hear the aftermath. You could see the crying sick boy on the floor. You could see the arrogant posture of Stella before the realization hit. You could see the Vance ID badge. Warkstilling Invest just witnessed the most horrific thing on Oceanic Flight 902. Senior purser physically assaulted a sick child. The plot twist, the dad is the owner of the airline. Oceanic, Norstak Tokama, Narsh Damien Vance. The algorithm caught it. First it was the aviation blogs. The Points guy retweeted it with a shocked emoji. Then it was the social justice Twitter. Then TMZ picked it up. TMZ breaking. Billionaire. Damien Vance's sick son attacked by flight attendant on his own plane. Video inside. By the time Damien sat in the private VIP lounge of the terminal, waiting for his drivers and his lawyers, the video had 4.5 million views. Damien wasn't watching the views, though. He was watching Leo. Leo was sitting on a plush velvet sofa, drinking a hot chocolate that the lounge manager had personally prepared. A team of paramedics had already checked him out. The wrist was sprained, badly bruised, but not broken. The asthma attack had subsided, though his chest was still tight. "Does it hurt?" Damien asked, sitting beside him, his voice gentle. "Only when I move it," Leo said, looking at the bandage on his wrist. He looked up at his father. "Dad, is that lady going to jail?" Damien sighed. He took a sip of his scotch, a 25-year-old Macallan that tasted like ash in his mouth. "I don't know about jail, Leo. That's up to the courts. But she won't ever hurt anyone again." The double doors of the VIP lounge burst open. Richard Sterling, the CEO of Oceanic Airlines and cousin to the passenger on the plane, rushed in. He looked like a man who had just run a marathon in a suit. His tie was crooked. He was sweating. "Damien," Richard gasped, stopping short of the sofa. He looked at Leo, then at Damien. "Damien, I got here as fast as I could. I was at a gala in Manhattan. I took the helicopter." Damien didn't stand up. He didn't offer his hand. He swirled the ice in his glass. "You have a hiring problem, Richard," Damien said calmly. "She's fired," Richard said immediately. "Terminated. For cause. Effective 5 minutes ago. I signed the digital paperwork in the helicopter. She loses her pension. She loses her benefits. She is blacklisted from the industry." "That's a start," Damien said. He set the glass down. "But it's not enough." "Not enough?" Richard wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "Damien, we are issuing a public apology. We are offering to donate to the Asthma Foundation. We are—" "She kicked him, Richard," Damien interrupted. He stood up slowly. She looked at a boy who couldn't breathe, a boy who was alone and frightened, and she decided he was trash. That isn't a training error. That is a culture rot. Damien walked over to the window of the lounge, looking out at the tarmac where Flight 902 still sat, dark and empty. The other passengers had been rebooked on other flights, gifted thousands of dollars in vouchers to keep them quiet, though the NDAs wouldn't stop the video that was already out. "I want an audit," Damien said, his back to the CEO. "An audit?" "Of the entire in-flight services department." Damien turned around. "I want to know how many complaints have been filed against Stella Caroline before today. I want to know who ignored them. I want to know who promoted her." Richard swallowed hard. "Damien, that's going to open a lot of doors we might not want opened. HR records are messy." "Open them," Damien commanded. "Because if I find out that she has done this before, if I find out that she has mistreated elderly passengers or minority passengers, or any passenger who didn't fit her idea of first class, and your management team swept it under the rug?" Damien walked closer to Richard until he was inches from the CEO's face. "Then I'm not just firing the flight attendant. I'm firing the board, including you." Richard nodded, pale. "Understood. I'll start the audit tonight." "Good." Damien turned back to Leo. "Come on, son. The jet is ready." "We're going on another plane?" Leo asked, looking nervous. "Not an Oceanic plane," Damien said, picking up Leo's battered backpack with the reverence of a holy relic. "We're taking the Gulf Stream. No flight attendants. Just us." As they walked out of the lounge, Damien's phone buzzed. It was a notification from his legal team. Subject, Stella Caroline. Assets and civil suit. "Mr. Vance, we have begun the preliminary asset search on Ms. Caroline in preparation for the civil suit for damages and emotional distress. It appears she owns a condo in Queens and has a modest savings account. Do you want to proceed with the maximum claim?" Damien looked at the message. He thought about the kick. He thought about the sound of Leo's wheezing. He typed back 2 words. "Take everything." Meanwhile, in the holding cell, Stella was finally allowed one phone call. She didn't call a lawyer. She couldn't afford a good one, not against Vance. She called her mother. "Mom!" Stella cried into the receiver, her hand shaking so hard she could barely hold it. "Stella!" Her mother's voice sounded strange, cold. "Stella, is it true? Mom, please, I need bail money. I need you to come to JFK. "Stella," her mother said, and the tone cut deeper than the handcuffs. "It's on CNN. It's on Fox. My neighbors, Mrs. Higgins next door, just sent me the link. She said, 'Isn't that your daughter kicking the sick boy?' Mom, let me explain. I raised you better," her mother said, her voice trembling with shame. "I raised you to be kind. I don't know who that person in the video is." Click. The line went dead. Stella stared at the receiver. The hum of the dial tone was the only sound in the world. She sat down on the metal bench, burying her face in her hands. The silence of the cell was different from the silence of the first-class cabin. This silence was permanent. The Manhattan Criminal Court was a stark contrast to the world Stella Carolyn used to inhabit. There was no filtered air here, no scent of lavender hot towels or expensive scotch. The courtroom smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the damp wool of cheap suits. It was the smell of bureaucracy and misery. It had been 6 months since the incident on Flight 902, 6 months of media purgatory. The tabloids had dubbed her the first-class monster. Her face, twisted in a snarl as she stood over the sick boy, had been murmured, shared, and analyzed by millions. She couldn't walk into a grocery store without feeling the burning stares of strangers. Stella stood at the defendant's table, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wore a grey suit she had bought at a discount outlet. Her designer wardrobe had been sold weeks ago to pay her mounting legal fees. Her hair, once the source of so much pride, was pulled back in a severe, messy bun, revealing a face that had aged 10 years in half a year. The dark circles under her eyes were bruises of exhaustion. The gallery was packed. Reporters sat with their pens poised like daggers. But Stella didn't look at them. She couldn't. Her eyes kept drifting to the front row. Damian Vance sat there. He was an island of calm in the chaotic sea of the courtroom. He wore a navy suit that fit him with architectural precision. He didn't look angry. He didn't look happy. He looked like a statue carved from judgment itself. Next to him was an empty seat. Leo was not there. He was in London, finally receiving the treatment he needed, safe from people like her. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison swept into the room, his black robes billowing. He was a stern man, with a reputation for zero tolerance when it came to bullying. He took his seat, adjusted his spectacles, and looked down at Stella. His gaze felt physically heavy, pressing her into the floor. "Stella Caroline," Judge Harrison began, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You have stood before this court charged with assault in the 3rd degree, reckless endangerment of a minor, and harassment. You have pleaded guilty." Stella nodded weakly. "Yes, Your Honor. I have reviewed the evidence," the judge continued, picking up a file. "I have watched the video. In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen crimes of passion, crimes of greed, and crimes of desperation. But this?" He shook his head slowly. "This was a crime of arrogance. You saw a vulnerable child, gasping for air, and your instinct was not to help, but to discard. You treated a human being like refuse because he did not fit your aesthetic of luxury." Stella flinched. Every word was a lash. "Ms. Caroline, you are hereby sentenced to 18 months of probation," the judge declared. "You will complete 500 hours of community service. You will attend mandatory anger management and bias training. Stella let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Probation. No jail time. A tiny spark of relief flickered in her chest. She could survive this. She could move away, start over, maybe work in a hotel in the Midwest where no one knew her. However, Judge Harrison raised a finger, silencing the murmurs in the room. We now move to the matter of the civil suit filed by Mr. Vance regarding medical expenses, punitive damages, and emotional distress. Stella's lawyer, a court-appointed public defender who looked as tired as she felt, stiffened beside her. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, the judge announced. The actions of the defendant caused severe physical trauma and significant psychological harm to a minor. The court orders Stella Caroline to pay damages in the amount of $250,000. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. $250,000, Stella whispered, her voice cracking. I don't have that. The court is aware of your financial standing, the judge said coldly. Therefore, the court authorizes the immediate seizure and liquidation of your assets to satisfy this judgment. Your condominium in Queens, your vehicle, and your savings accounts are hereby frozen and transferred to the plaintiff's legal team for processing. The gavel banged. Crack. It sounded exactly like the noise her heel had made when it hit Leo's wrist. Court is adjourned. The reality didn't hit her all at once. It seeped in like freezing water. Her condo, the place she had renovated with her bonuses, her sanctuary, her car, her safety net. Gone. As the courtroom began to clear, Stella remained frozen. She felt a presence approach the table. She looked up. Damien Vance was standing there. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He smelled of rain and sandalwood. "Mr. Vance," Stella choked out. Tears finally spilled over, hot and stinging. "Please, you have billions. Why are you doing this? I have nothing left. I'm homeless. I'm ruined. Isn't that enough?" Damien looked down at her. His expression softened, not with pity, but with a profound, distant sadness. "You think this is about money?" Damien asked softly. "Stella, I spend $250,000 on jet fuel in a month. I don't need your money." "Then why take everything?" she sobbed. "How am I supposed to live?" Damien placed a hand on the wooden table. "You have your health, Stella. You can breathe without a machine. You can walk without your joints swelling. You have a working immune system. You are wealthier right now than my son has ever been in his entire life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Every cent seized from you today," Damien said, his voice steady, "is being donated directly to the Leo Vance Pediatric Respiratory Center. You aren't paying me. You are paying for the inhalers, the nebulizers, and the gene therapies for children whose parents cannot afford a first-class ticket. Your vanity is going to save the very lives you looked down upon." He slid the paper toward her. "And regarding how you are supposed to live," Damien said. "I heard you've been having trouble finding employment. The airline blacklist is quite effective." Stella looked at the paper. It wasn't a check. It was a job application form. "I made a call," Damien said. "The Port Authority at JFK is hiring. They have a high turnover rate for the night shift custodial staff. It pays minimum wage, but it offers health insurance." Stella stared at him. "You want me to be a janitor? At the airport where I used to be a senior purser?" "I think it would be a good fit," Damien said, buttoning his jacket. "It's honest work, and it will give you plenty of time to look at the people walking by, to really look at them, to remember that no human being is trash to be kicked aside." He turned and walked away. He didn't look back. 1 year later, The fluorescent lights of Terminal 4 buzzed with a low, irritating hum. It was 3:15 a.m. The terminal was mostly empty, save for a few weary travelers sleeping on benches and the security guards patrolling the perimeter. Stella Caroline dipped the grey string mop into the bucket of soapy water. The water was murky, smelling of industrial ammonia and bleach. Her hands, once manicured with French tips, were now raw and chapped. Her fingernails were short and brittle. She wore a shapeless blue jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. On her chest, a cheap plastic name tag read, S. Caroline, Custodial Services. She wrung out the mop and slapped it onto the linoleum floor. Swish, swish. She worked rhythmically, cleaning the footprints of thousands of people she would never know. She cleaned up spilled coffee. She cleaned up mud. She cleaned the toilets that the first-class passengers used before boarding their flights to Paris and Rome. She was invisible. People walked past her as if she were part of the architecture, a ghost haunting the terminal she used to rule. Above the boarding gate, a massive LCD screen flickered with the 24-hour news cycle. And finally, a heartwarming story from London, the news anchor announced. Stella stopped mopping. She leaned on the handle, her back aching from the repetitive motion. She looked up at the screen. The footage showed a ribbon-cutting ceremony. There were balloons, doctors in white coats, and flashing cameras. In the center of the frame stood Damien Vance. He looked older, tired but proud, and standing next to him was a boy, Leo. He was 13 now. He had grown several inches. He wasn't wearing a hoodie. He was wearing a sharp blazer, open at the collar. He was smiling, a bright, dazzling smile. He looked healthy. His cheeks were full. He was laughing at something his father said. The new Vance wing will provide free respiratory care for over 10,000 underprivileged children, the anchor said. Leo Vance, now in remission thanks to the treatment, dedicated the wing to his late mother. Stella watched the screen. She saw the life in the boy's eyes, the boy she had kicked, the boy she had left on the floor. A single tear rolled down Stella's cheek. It wasn't a tear of self-pity this time. It was something else. Regret, perhaps. Or maybe understanding. Her money, her condo, her car, her vanity, had helped build that wing. In her destruction, she had inadvertently done the only good thing in her life. "Caroline!" the shift supervisor yelled from down the hall. "Stop staring at the TV. Someone threw up in the men's room near Gate 42. Get moving." Stella wiped her face with the rough sleeve of her jumpsuit. "Coming," she called back. Her voice was quiet, humble. She dipped the mop back into the bucket, the grey water swirling around. She took a deep breath of the chemical air, grateful, for the first time in a long time, that she could breathe it at all. She pushed the bucket forward and walked toward Gate 42, disappearing into the long, empty corridor of the airport that never sleeps. Stella Caroline spent her career building walls, walls between first class and economy, between the worthy and the unworthy. She thought her uniform made her superior. She thought her status made her untouchable. But in one moment of cruelty, she learned the hardest lesson of all. Karma doesn't care about your frequent flyer status. Stella lost her fortune, her career, and her reputation. But in a twist of fate, the very assets she prized so highly were stripped away to save the boy she tried to hurt. She kicked a beggar and woke up a billionaire, only to find herself scrubbing the floors she once walked on in heels. It serves as a brutal reminder to us all. Status is temporary, but how you treat people lasts forever. If this story sent a chill down your spine, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us know you want more stories like this. And I have a question for you. Do you think Stella's punishment was fair? Was a lifetime of scrubbing floors justice, or was Damian Vance too harsh? I want to hear your opinion in the comments below. If you believe in karma and justice, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. We upload new stories of justice served every week. Thanks for watching, be kind to one another, and I'll see you in the next video.